Let us pray. From our forests and parkland to our prairies and mountains comes the call of our land. From our farmsteads, towns, and cities comes the call of our people that as legislators of this province, we act with responsibility and sensitivity. Lord, grant us the wisdom to meet such challenges. Amen. Honorable members, we'll have to wait for just a moment. Carry on. Let's go to introduction.
Introduction of visitors.
Minister of Public Works, Supply and Services.
Mr. Speaker, I take a great deal of pride today in introducing a constituent of mine that is seated in your gallery, a grade 6 student from the St. Dominic's School in Cold Lake who was co-winner of the 1987 Parliamentary Essay Contest by the name of Kristen Scamber. Kristen's essay was entitled, "What the Legislature Building Means to Me." I had a chance to quickly read it, and she described it as a symbol of democracy, went on to discuss the various freedoms we enjoy in a democracy, discussed the various services provided by government to Albertans and to her own community of Cold Lake, and very skillfully wound into it the future recreation potential of the beautiful lake her and her family live on. And I'm sure, Kristen, that with your help and the help of others, we will soon convince all my colleagues that there should be a significant announcement related to Cold Lake. Kristen is joined in the Speaker's gallery by her brother Darren, mother Bonnie, father Wilf, and I'd ask that they stand and receive the warm welcome of the Assembly.
Member for Chinook.
Mr. Speaker, in the same vein, and sharing in the same contest and prize from the constituency of Chinook, the community of Veteran, Alberta, we have a young lad who also did a number on this building, but he was quite innovative. He projected himself into age 95 and then looked back. And sometime in the next year, I would like to have a conversation with him and have him explain to me how that looks from where he is at age 95. I think it's very commendable, Mr. Speaker, that you and your association sponsor these kinds of exercises for young people. It's certainly very commendable for Derek Talene and his mother and father and sister sitting in your gallery to encourage and to participate. Thank you very much. They're standing now.
Presenting petitions. Reading and receiving petitions. Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Notices of motions. Introduction of bills.
Mr. Speaker, I request leave to introduce a bill being the Gas Resources Preservation Amendment Act 1987. Mr. Speaker, the purpose of the amendment is to provide enabling legislation that will allow the government to ensure that natural gas removed from the province does so under a uniform set of terms and conditions.
The Honourable Minister of Energy has moved first reading of Bill 45, Gas Resources Preservation Amendment Act 1987. All members willing to give assent to first reading, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, please say no. So ordered.
Bill 45, being Gas Resources Preservation Amendment Act 1987, introduced by Honourable Dr. Weber, is now read a first time. Tabling returns and reports.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to file a copy of a discussion paper on the Alberta Securities Commission. The discussion paper was released today and outlines some recommendations given me by a ministerial advisory committee composed of and chaired by Professor David Jones, assisted by Mr. Bill Grace and Mr. Chip Collins.
Pursuant to Section 19.5 of the Legislative Assembly Act, I'm tabling copies of Members' Services orders made by the Special Standing Committee on Members' Services.
Introduction of special guests.
Member for Calgary Northwest, followed by Lord Minster.
It is my pleasure today, Mr. Speaker, to introduce to you and through you and to the members of the Assembly a very special group of 27 students from my constituency who attend the W.O. Mitchell School. They are attended by two teachers, Mr. Broadhurst and Mr. McCabe, as well as 11 parents, Mrs. Kirkpatrick, Mr. Olson and Mrs. McGavran, Mr. Santis, Mrs. O'Connor, and Mrs. Backman, Mrs. McNeil and Mrs. Christensen, and Mrs. Kootenay, Mrs. Ma, and Mrs. Robert Shaw. They are in the members' gallery. I'd ask that they stand and receive the customary welcome of the Assembly.
Lord Minster.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to introduce to you and through you 57 students in grade 6 from the Kit Scotty Elementary School, and they are accompanied by two teachers, Mrs. Harris and Mrs. Gordon. Kit Scotty Elementary School, the name Kit Scotty rings a bell, as the former member for many years resided and is still residing in Kit Scotty, Bud Miller. I would ask that the Assembly, if they would rise, and the Assembly would give them a cordial welcome.
Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, seated in the members' gallery are 32 students in the grade 6 class of the St. Paul's School located in the Edmonton-Glenora constituency. They are accompanied by their teacher, Mrs. Jane Warren, and I would ask them to rise and receive the customary welcome of this Assembly.
Member for Highwood.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Technology, Mr. Young, the member for Edmonton Jasper Place, I would like you to know that a lovely pair of senior citizens have joined us today in the members' gallery, both of whom have been very active in helping me in my special line of endeavor in the world of senior citizens. I present, Mr. Speaker, Sheila and Bill Croyne, and would ask that they rise to receive the plaudits of the Assembly.
Ministerial statements. Oral question period.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to direct the first question to the Provincial Treasurer. Mr. Speaker, on August the 14th, 1986, the government gave itself authority to borrow some $2 billion through the sale of short-term notes to the Heritage Savings Trust Fund. On May the 7th, 1987, the government passed an order in Council increasing this amount to $2.3 billion and rolling over the previous notes for 6 months. Mr. Speaker, on the Heritage Savings Trust Fund Committee on October 28th, the Treasurer at that time said he would not want to reduce the fund. I can probably give you that one variable measure, that one point, that is, I would not contemplate on encroaching on the capital. My question to the Treasurer, why has he changed his mind so dramatically since last October?
Mr. Speaker, I've not changed my mind.
Mr. Speaker, the words say differently. The fact is that you have, Mr. Speaker. Let me go on, though, and say because of this, we're up to $2.3 billion. Will the Treasurer advise the Assembly the extent
to which the government has borrowed from the Heritage Fund in support of current operating expenditures by the government? And is the $2 billion gone at this particular time?
Mr. Speaker, I think it is appropriate to ask why the order in council was required. And of course, it is in the context of a very sound financial plan which this government has for the use of the Heritage Fund money that required us to make that adjustment. We now, Mr. Speaker, since we successfully announced and launched the two major programs to stabilize the interest costs, both for farmers and for the small businessmen, some $3 billion of unmatched, unparalleled assistance to those two sectors, we have now found that in terms of the balancing of our portfolio and the best judgment we have with respect to the repayment schedule on those two funds approved by this Assembly, Mr. Speaker, that in fact we can now use some of the Heritage Fund money on a short-term basis to match the retirement of that debt.
Well, Mr. Speaker, whatever the reason, it's still using it for the operating part of the provincial budget. That's the reality, something you said that you wouldn't do, Mr. Speaker. And my question to the Minister, and he said just as recently as March 27th, Mr. Speaker, that with the current strong financial position of the government, the fact that we do have the Heritage Fund in place, we're able to borrow money, for example, on the New York commercial paper market right now at approximately just under 6%, whereas we can invest that money here and make a larger return for it and work on that spread. My question then, flowing from that answer back at that time from the Treasurer, why are we now then borrowing up to $2.3 billion from the trust fund and in the process losing millions of dollars to the provincial treasury?
Speaker, it might take me at least an hour to sort out the confusing statements by the member from Norwood. His clear lack of understanding with respect to financial management is now evident. It's been evident over the series of questions, Mr. Speaker, and it continues to become clearer that the member from Norwood knows very little about financial management. Now, what we have, Mr. Speaker, is an opportunity, in terms of the financial clout of this province, to use the resources which are available to us, both in terms of the borrowing power of the province itself, because just recently, the Standard & Poor's and Moody's both confirmed that, in fact, as a result of the strong fiscal plan announced in this budget, that the credit rating of this province has not changed since the adjustment in the fall of 1986. That means, Mr. Speaker, that we can use the tremendous strength of this province in terms of borrowing on the international markets to secure prime rates. Mr. Speaker, it should be known that there are several rates available in the market. There are those rates which are short-term rates, there are those rates which are long-term rates, and depending what the market structure is, we tend to enter the market on a variety of rate structures. Sometimes we borrow short-term, and it is those short-term borrowing rates, the 6% rate, that was referred to in my comments. Mr. Speaker, if you want to borrow long-term, as we tried to explain before, the rates obviously tail up. Currently, the long-term rates, although the market is now somewhat unstable, would approach the 9.4, 9.5%. Now, the appropriate question here is not what is happening to the money, because the money is being well invested. We're generating a strong use of that money, and the money is not essentially being used for general revenue fund, although there is a small portion of the Heritage Fund being used for general revenue purposes. As I've indicated before, an opportunity for us to use as a barometer effect when the market is going against us the Heritage Savings Trust Fund money on the current operating rates. That puts money back into the trust fund. It is not reducing the capital value and providing a substantial cash flow for the Heritage Fund, as opposed to having that interest flow offshore or into other international markets. Sound fiscal management, in my view, Mr. Speaker. Moreover, Mr. Speaker, because when the market does adjust against us, and we do not always have the flexibility to enter the market with respect to the best time, we have to use that fund for that purpose. And that's essentially what we're doing. We're using liquidity. I've announced that in the House before, and as we put in place a longer-term strategy to balance our borrowing portfolio, we then must respond to the market, and we're doing just that. Now, the other use of the Heritage Fund, Mr. Speaker, he started the question, not I, Mr. Speaker. The other part of the Heritage Fund, Mr. Speaker, is being used to fund, on a short-term basis, part of the requirements for the new Farm Credit Stability Program and the Small Business Assistance Program. That 9% money, Mr. Speaker. Now, obviously, Mr. Speaker, if you know anything about financial management, you will know that there's going to be some repayment of capital, some repayment of the principal of that loan as the annual payments are made. Well, we have to make some judgment, Mr. Speaker, as to how soon that's going to...
An honourable Minister, chair has to make some judgment also. Final supplementary, Leader of the Opposition.
So, Mr. Speaker, it always is confusing when I quote the Treasurer's own statement here in the House.
Right.
And, Mr. Speaker, the fact is we don't know how long this is going to go on. You've already extended it 6 months. What is short-term? What is long-term? If this economy stays dormant, is it not possible that this government may never pay the Heritage Trust Fund back from the operating expenses?
More misleading statements, Mr. Speaker. I can assure you if I wanted to take the market right now, I could fully finance any requirements of this province, but we have to judge that very carefully. Now, Mr. Speaker, what we know here is that the people of Alberta understand very clearly that we have presented a sound position, one which deals with the question of the downsizing of government, the new realities in terms of the income flows, using the strength of our borrowing capacity in the General Revenue Fund, providing the opportunity to use the Alberta Heritage Savings Trust Fund, that surplus amount of money which is sitting there, and some people say it isn't around, but the member from Norwood just said there's $2.3 billion sitting in the fund, Mr. Speaker, and to use that money, Mr. Speaker, for opportunities for Albertans. We have argued, Mr. Speaker, all along we'll turn to that fund wherever necessary, tap it when it's needed, use it for the people of this province, and that's essentially what we're doing. We're fulfilling our commitment, Mr. Speaker, using the Heritage Fund for that purpose, and I know that those shameful socialists across the way would spend that fund, Mr. Speaker. We're investing it.
Member for Edmonton Meadowlark.
Lofty sentiments, Mr. Speaker, but departing seriously from reality. How can the minister stand in this House and say that he is capping the fund, the Heritage Savings Trust Fund, when he is proposing capital fund expenditures of $140 million this year, when he has made no provisions for inflation, and when in fact any losses under the Agricultural Term Stability Loan Stability Program and the Small Business Term Stability Loan Program will be borne by the Heritage Savings Trust Fund? Could he please clarify that for the House and for the people of Alberta?
To the contrary, Mr. Speaker, it seems I have to clarify for the member from Meadowlark first. What we have, Mr. Speaker, and I know a three-variable is too complex for the member across the way to understand. We have three funds here, Mr. Speaker. I'll generate the first fund as being the loan portfolio fund for the farm and for the small business purposes. That's a separate fund passed this legislature. I know the member from Meadowlark probably didn't pay much attention to it because it was too powerful for those sectors. It was too much of a good government response, and I know he doesn't like to hear it, Mr. Speaker, but it was a very successful plan. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, we have the Heritage Savings Trust Fund, and thirdly, we have the General Revenue Fund. Those are three separate funds which are accounted for in this Assembly, and we have said before, Mr. Speaker, that in terms of the Heritage Fund itself, we are not going to detract from the capital of that fund. $15 billion worth of money at work for Albertans, Mr. Speaker. Now, the member across the way tends to forget. Even the Keynesian argument, which I know is a school that the member came from, the Keynesian argument shows that as the interest rate goes up and you have bought bonds at that rate, obviously when the interest rate goes down, the capital must go up. A simple formula, Mr. Speaker. Now, we have $1.9 billion worth of bonds invested in other provinces. They're invested, Mr. Speaker, at about 16% on average. What has happened to the $1.9 billion, Mr. Speaker? It's now worth dramatically more. So any arguments that the member from Meadowlark and his naive economic approach suggest, in fact, are absolutely obtruse. The value of the fund has gone up. There's no
Thank you, Red Deer South.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker, to the Treasurer. Could he please advise the Assembly what percentage of the total provincial expenditures in this year's budget will be earned or generated as a result of the Heritage Savings Trust Fund?
That's a good question, Mr. Speaker, and that certainly is in the context of how the fiscal plan fits and articulates between the General Revenue Fund and the Alberta Heritage Trust Fund. Mr. Speaker, it is clear that we are transferring the income flow from the Heritage Fund into the General Revenue Fund, $1.6 billion in 1985-86, and $1.3 billion this past year. Mr. Speaker, that's the income flow. That's the return from the investment, Mr. Speaker, that is saving tax dollars and allowing us to afford the lowest tax regime in Canada. That's the performance, Mr. Speaker, of the Heritage Fund, and that's how it's working today to save Albertans from the difficult period we're in.
Second main question, Leader of the Opposition. Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to designate my second question, member from Edmonton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Since the hospital's minister's surprise announcement last week to de-insure contraceptive counseling and other medical services for women related to their reproductive care, a number of groups, including Edmonton Planned Parenthood, Calgary Community Health Services, and now the government's own Advisory Council on Women's Issues, have denounced this move and have raised a number of critically concerned questions. Will the minister announce today that he will stop and review this decision, or is he just going to sit back and have more groups and individuals mobilize in opposition against it?
First of all, Mr. Speaker, the honourable member is incorrect in his suggestion that the Women's Advisory Council has denounced this particular move. Indeed, I'm meeting Thursday afternoon, 3:30, with members of the Women's Council and their chairman to discuss a number of issues relating to the matters that were dealt with last week, and I expect after that meeting that they indeed will have, after having had an opportunity to discuss the matter with me, a better understanding of what is being proposed. So it's completely inappropriate and unfair for the honourable member to suggest that organization has taken a particular position. Thus far, they have not. In addition, I should say, Mr. Speaker, that there are a number of other opportunities that exist within the hospital or the medical care fee schedule for general practitioners to bill for contraceptive counseling. The member should also be aware of some major studies that have recently been released in this province that point very definitely to better methods.
Well, speaking about being inaccurate and unfair, I wonder if the minister has spoken to the registrar of the College of Physicians and Surgeons, Dr. Roy LaRiche, who says that he has no information or any studies to prove that physicians involved in counseling are abusing the fee schedule. Will the minister now back up his allegations of last week, the basis of which he made the cuts, and name the names of those physicians in the medical profession who he says, and I quote, Mr. Speaker, who are badly abusing the fee code to pad their own pockets? Will the minister please explain who these people are and name their names?
Well, Minister, there were 3 questions in that supplementary, so take your pick.
Well, the answer to all of them is no. No.
Mr. Speaker, I don't know how often we have to put up with ministers who make statements and not back them up with any background or information on them. The only minister that has some integrity is the Minister of Community Health, and I'm wondering, given the report last week put out by the Alberta Community Health Services, who say that the most likely explanation for high teenage pregnancy rates, particularly in rural Alberta, are the ignorance and difficulty in accessing birth control, will this minister not convince his colleague, the Minister of Hospitals, to reverse these cuts, which will only exacerbate a very bad situation, particularly in rural Alberta?
Mr. Speaker, I don't believe the honourable member has read the document, because the document suggests that that kind of counseling, those kind of services for young teenagers in this province is the least effective method of providing for family planning, for teenage pregnancy, for contraception, or any kind of that any nature of that kind of counseling. The best way to do it is through our health units, through our family planning programs located in Calgary and Edmonton and other parts of the province. It's through a human sexuality program within the school boards, within the schools of our province, grades 7 to 9 and 10 to 12, and those are the kind of efforts that we've got to make sure that those programs are in place, so that our young people are fully familiar with all of the resources they need, all the knowledge they need, so that they can prevent pregnancy and live a normal kind of existence in the province.
We do have a lot of compassion with this minister, Mr. Speaker. The report also points out, in contradiction to what the minister says, that only 2 out of the 27 health units have anything remotely close to a full family planning clinical service, and that they're wanting them out there, particularly in the rural areas. Will the minister now convince his cabinet colleagues and get the additional funding that are needed, in addition to other programs which may enhance family planning services, but to have full clinical services at all 27 of the 27 health units throughout the province?
Well, again, Mr. Speaker, I have to restate, as I did last week, that those decisions on programs are made by local boards of health, and we will encourage them again to reset, relook at their priorities, and recognize that this is a concern, that this is a problem, and encourage them to take on the program and mount it and offer it in their health unit.
Edmonton Centre has made some accusations that are totally inappropriate with regard to not only what's contained in the report. It's entitled "In Trouble, A Way Out," and it was recently completed for the directors of Alberta's community health system. That report,
supplementary. The chair wonders whether, to the minister, this should be raised as a point of order at the end of question period because of the allegations. Perhaps we could address it at that time. Could we address it? All right. Well, Honourable Minister, quick finish.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the suggestion was made by the honourable member that the report in question gave the impression somehow or other that we ought to reinstate this fee for contraceptive counselling to medical practitioners, and the report says quite the opposite. In fact, it says, and I quote, "Studies have demonstrated that teens are embarrassed to go to their family physician, not only because he or she is familiar with the family, but also because they fear it."
Thank you. Honourable Minister, thank you. You've made the point that your perception of the facts is radically different from the member. Thank you. The member for perhaps all members would like to sit down for a while. Chair recognizes Edmonton Goldbar, followed by Calgary Glenmore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to go back to ask a supplementary to the original question regarding the minister's statements about doctors badly abusing the plan and padding their incomes. Did the minister ever raise this abuse issue in any discussions with the AMA or the College of Physicians or Surgeons? Surely this is a case where the college should be policing members if abuse is in fact taking place.
Mr. Speaker, the particular fee schedule in question only exists in 2 other provinces besides Alberta. In all other cases, general practitioners are expected to bill. Well, do you want to hear the answer or not?
Honourable members, especially in the opposition ranks, it's been a fair amount of chit-chat back and forth today, even more than usual, and if it's going to start to turn into heckling someone, then they have every right, of course, to sit down and we go on to the next series of questions. But, Minister, continue.
Other provinces, practitioners are expected to provide contraceptive counseling and advice under other fee schedules that I've explained in this House, like the annual examination during the course of prenatal and postnatal care of women under the maternity benefit, and a variety of other areas. Mr. Speaker, so that members would understand exactly where the government view is on this entire matter, I'd like to file with the House a copy of a letter addressed to Dr. Kennedy, President of the Alberta Medical Association, signed by myself, that points out in some detail the areas of the fee schedule where doctors should be expected to provide contraceptive advice when it's requested by their patients, and also goes on to point out what the real problems are in this province with respect to teenage pregnancies and how we believe we can effectively deal with them. This letter, I think, speaks for itself in terms of our position in this entire matter. And I just conclude by saying we certainly recognize that there is a very difficult problem here, and the way to resolve it is not to reinstate contraceptive counseling into fee schedule when there are plenty of opportunities that doctors have had for a long time to provide that advice.
Calgary Glenmore, not West Loch Sturgeon, Calgary Glenmore.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. To the Minister of Occupational and Community Health, there's been an establishment of a women's resource centre in Calgary by the Grace Hospital. Can the Minister tell me if this resource centre gives contraceptive counselling to women and teenagers, and is it funded by the province, by the government?
Mr. Speaker, the Grace Hospital Women's Health Resource Centre is an excellent centre. that provides just that kind of advice. And it's in partnership with the Calgary Board of Health and other agencies in the city. It is providing a broad range of services for women to go and get counseling on any matter relating to female medical matters. And we were very fortunate to be able to provide them with a $5,000 grant in the past fiscal year, and I hope to be able to provide them with more support in the days ahead.
Main question, Leader of the Liberal Party.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to designate my question today to the member for Calgary-Buffalo.
Thank you. This is to the Minister of Education, Mr. Speaker. With two-thirds of Alberta teenagers sexually active by age 18, with teenage pregnancy rates 40% above the national average, and with the incidence of sexually transmitted diseases 60% above the national average, something's badly wrong in this province, yet the Minister of Education still refuses to make sex education, including education about AIDS, a compulsory part of the junior and senior high school curriculum. To the Minister, is the Minister aware of these statistics, and does she realize that the failure to educate school children on sexuality matters has long-term a major cost to society and individuals in terms of disease, pregnancy, and related social problems?
Yes, I do, Mr. Speaker. I also respect the right of some parents in a matter as personal and intimate as human sexuality to choose to educate their own children in those matters. But I would counsel those parents to be sure that, in fact, they are teaching their young children about human sexuality, and particularly about the public health risk now of which we are aware in terms of sexually transmitted diseases.
The problem is not with the parents, it's with the schools. Does the Minister consider it acceptable that many of our schools, including all 14 Calgary senior high schools and many junior highs, have no sex education whatsoever, and many students are being left in total ignorance?
Mr. Speaker, I know that the matter is in fact before the Calgary Board of Education tomorrow night, and I believe that they are in fact concerned about the absence of human sexuality education in their senior high schools. However, I would point out that the province has moved with respect to the secondary curriculum review. The first and foremost major curriculum change we will be doing will be taking effect this fall when we introduce the new health and personal life skills curriculum in the junior high level, and followed the following year, fall of '88, into the senior high level.
Everything the Minister and her predecessors have done is optional. Why doesn't the Minister of Education accept her responsibility to society and our young people and mandate that sex education, including education about AIDS, will be available to each and every junior and senior high school student, unless the parent, of course, refuses permission? But why aren't the courses there?
Well, the courses are there, Mr. Speaker. Certainly there is a question with respect to boards implementing and having to opt into the human sexuality portion of the curriculum. I am very carefully monitoring school boards throughout the province, and it may well be that the province has to move in a way different than we have in the past. However, I want to protect the right of parents, which I think is fundamental, and to respect their right to withdraw their children from the human sexuality component if they so choose.
Well, the courses aren't there, and the Minister in the past has used the local autonomy excuse for the failure to set standards on sex education, on user fees in schools, and on learning disabilities. Where exactly is the line at which the provincial government will set policy pursuant to its constitutional responsibility and mandate?
Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure what the honourable member means by a constitutional responsibility. I think there is certainly a human responsibility to have the best possible curriculum that we can within our school systems, and perhaps the honourable member would like to review the curriculum. I think he would find it to be, in fact, some of the best in North America, and I would include the human sexuality curriculum in that too. As I have said, the mandatory improvements in the secondary curriculum will start to take effect this fall. They are on an optional basis right now, and many schools are in fact availing themselves of that curriculum. But again, I would say that I will monitor those boards. If we have to move in a way differently than we have, fine, but I want to respect the right of parents, which I happen to believe is very important in this matter.
Member for Edmonton Avonmore.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Education, good course content is not enough. What training is the Minister providing to teachers who will be offering these courses, which have as their subject matter very difficult and sensitive areas? And what monitoring of the teachers presenting these courses will she be doing?
In fact, some of the best in-service training that we've been able to provide, which is in keeping with the whole purpose of the secondary curriculum and changes that will be taking effect starting in the fall. Much of the in-service with respect to the junior high health curriculum has already in fact been done. We are as well looking, as I indicated during my estimates when the member raised the matter there as well, looking at ways to improve the way in which we in-service teachers across this province, to do it in more efficient ways, more effective ways. As well, we are encouraging, and as part of the health curriculum, bringing in other professionals from the community into the schools to ensure that there is as comprehensive an addressing of the issue as is possible.
Member for Vermilion Viking.
Yes, to the Minister of Social Services. Many of the programs set in place today help young teenage mothers or young single mothers to make it easier to address a pregnancy rather than the responsibility of preventing it. Is the Minister looking at any programs that could put a greater responsibility back onto society, the home, and the parents in addressing this responsibility of preventing these pregnancies?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member raises a very difficult question, and while there may be a little bit of giggling across the way in the opposition, I think this is probably one of the most serious matters that I believe comes across my desk, that along with family violence, particularly as it affects children. And I think that it's fair to say that I view it as children having children. And the type of support that we have been putting in place, in fact, has been described by some people as almost entrapping them into the idea that they can gain an independent lifestyle by having a family. It's a very serious matter, Mr. Speaker. I don't have an answer for it, and I certainly hope that all members of the Assembly, as well as society as a whole, will give a serious look at this question, because certainly it is my view that there is not much thought given to the consequences of the actions that many of our young people are now taking.
Member Leader of the Representative Party, followed by the member for Edmonton Kingsway.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Economic Development and Trade, and it's with regards to the industrial and regional development grants of the federal government. I understand the Minister's Assistant Deputy Minister made remarks to a Commons Committee as of last week that indicated that concern over the tiered system of these grants and their application in Alberta, but as well indicated that Alberta is guaranteeing certain loans for companies in the province without this information being made available to a broad base of companies in the province. Could the Minister indicate at this time whether those comments are accurate and whether there is some discrimination going on with regards to the granting of guarantees in the province of Alberta?
Mr. Speaker, the representative of the department was requested through my office to appear before a Commons committee that was examining some of the dry programs, in particular the IRDP, which is the Industrial Regional Development Program. I agreed to the official from my department attending because Alberta has had for some time a concern with that program and the way it's structured, where certain parts of Canada are tiered, and as a result of that tiering, Alberta historically has received far less a proportion of the funding available than other parts of Canada. In the course of the discussions, the representative of the department did respond by saying the government has found it necessary from time to time in order to support industrial expansion and diversification in this province, to provide loan guarantees when other financial support mechanisms are not in place.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary question. With regards to the IRDP grant program, could the minister indicate whether any progress has been made and whether the federal government has indicated at this time they will make a change in that the application of policy? I know that the date of July 1st is a target date, but is there any preliminary information at this time?
Mr. Speaker, we have had a number of federal provincial meetings and discussions, as well as I've continued to discuss with my federal counterpart and express our view on the IRDP portion of the dry programs. Alberta has indicated on a number of occasions that we prefer that portion of that department's activities that are described as ERDA, or Economic and Regional Development Agreement process, where there are actual sub-agreements entered into where the conditions of the programs are clearly spelled out and their costs shared. We have requested that the IRDP be suspended until a thorough review is undertaken. Tomorrow I will be leaving for a federal provincial ministerial meeting of economic development ministers in Whitehorse, and this item will be on the agenda.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary question. In terms of the loan guarantees, the comment was made, new companies with merit. Could the minister indicate what the criteria is for merit and why some companies are unaware of the loan guarantees and others are not?
Mr. Speaker, through the course of a year, departments of government that are involved in economic activities, such as the Department of Forestry and Lands, the Department of Tourism, Technology Research, Telecommunication, and my own department, received many inquiries from Alberta entrepreneurs who are searching for ways to expand their operations or to develop new business opportunities. And in the course of working with these companies, we advise them of programs that are available to them, such as Alberta Opportunity Company, VENCAP, the Small Business Equity Corporations, and a variety of other programs that the government has established to encourage economic diversification. In some cases, an appropriate economic development tool is a loan guarantee or a partial loan guarantee. We've used it effectively in encouraging exports of Alberta products to other countries, and it has created our estimate of the volume of business that has resulted from those export loan guarantees is in excess of $50 million. So export loan guarantees and other guarantees are used when appropriate, when other financial mechanisms are not available, or this applies in a way that would be helpful to the Alberta economy.
Could the minister indicate the general value of the loan guarantees in the current fiscal year?
I'm sorry. Mr. Speaker, I didn't hear the question.
Mr. Speaker, to the minister, could the minister indicate the value of the loan guarantees since the inception of that program?
Mr. Speaker, since that's a question of some detail, I'd have to take it as notice, or the honourable member might like to put it on the order paper.
View followed by Westlock Sturgeon.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given that businesses cannot learn about these loan guarantees because the government won't inform them, does that mean, Mr. Speaker, that this arrangement is just one more example of how government largesse is only available to friends of the government?
Order. Garbage. Mr. Speaker, I fail to see how the honourable member could come to that kind of a conclusion. It's obvious he wasn't listening either to the questions or to the answers. Loan guarantees, the honourable member should know that on a number of occasions it's been made public in the public accounts which are released each year by the Auditor General. There's a listing in detail of the loan guarantees that are provided by the government. It is not a secret. It is an appropriate economic development tool that is used at times that it is required.
Clock Sturgeon.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister, and it's back to the original part of the question about the IRDP and Alberta not qualifying in the past, mostly because of the large using Alberta as a whole unit when the federal government comes to analyze whether the area is depressed enough to need help on IRDP. Has the Minister made any presentation to the federal government to reduce the sizes of areas under consideration when it comes to measuring whether or not federal government will bonus or put loans out under the IRDP system?
Mr. Speaker, we have, there are three basic criteria that the federal government uses in determining the tiers that qualify for different levels of federal support. Generally speaking, we don't subscribe to the tiered system, period. As I'd said in response to the earlier question by the member for Little Bow, that we support the use of IRDA sub-agreements between the federal and the provincial governments, where it is clearly spelled out the criteria and the range of support programs that are available. So our initial approach has been to the federal government, shift the funds that are available under IRDP to the IRDA programs and negotiate agreements with the provinces. Because essentially, Alberta believes that we should build upon our natural strengths across this province. And those natural strengths can best be described and identified by the provincial governments in consultation with the federal government, leading to agreements that would spell out the terms under which that support could be offered.
Edmonton Kingsway, followed by Edmonton Gold Bar, followed by Calgary Forest Lawn if there's time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This government has treated Northwest Trust and the credit unions differently, even though they both faced economic difficulties, similar economic difficulties, caused mainly by the collapse of the real estate markets. Apparently, 100,000 Edmontonian area credit union members, organized in a democratic manner, do not have the same influence of this government as some of their friends in Northwest Trust. To the Treasurer, Mr. Speaker, why was Northwest Trust's capital base restored to $50 million with no requirement that it be paid back, yet Capital City Savings and Credit Union will have to redeem the preferred shares held over its head by the Alberta government?
Mr. Speaker, if the member wants to pursue either of those questions, I'd be glad to, but to have them in that juxtaposition is almost impossible to respond to.
That's right, because there's no good answer. Why did Northwest Trust receive full face value for its non-performing real estate holdings, while by contrast, the Stabilization Corporation reduced the value of the land holdings of the credit unions and then compensated those credit unions under those slashed prices?
Mr. Speaker, first of all, I'm glad to finally find out that the member from Meadowlark has discovered that something's happened with respect to credit unions. The issue has been here for approximately 8 or 9 days. Moreover, Mr. Speaker, I think we should have a card that says parental guidance. These scenes may contain coarse language when that member speaks. In any event, Mr. Speaker, let me say that with respect to the credit union movement, that the credit union movement has been saved by this province, an unheard-of assistance which backstops $1.7 billion worth of deposits in the credit union movement right now. This government undertook in September of 1984 to provide that commitment to ensure that those deposits were guaranteed. Moreover, Mr. Speaker, as part of a rehabilitation movement, which I think saves the credit union movement in this province, we have put in place a very sophisticated program which will ensure the efficacy of the credit union movement across this province. A plan which deals both with the real estate assets, which have been touched on by the member in an obtruse way, but moreover, Mr. Speaker, deals with the long-term financing of the credit unions themselves. Now, part of the plan, Mr. Speaker, which was contemplated and outlined by this government, and a plan, moreover, which was supported by the credit union movement itself, dealt with that problem, putting in place a $335 to $350 million bailout proposal. Now, Mr. Speaker, with respect to the Edmonton Central problem, there are times, Mr. Speaker, in government when you must accept the obligation of being in government. There are times, Mr. Speaker, when a government is called upon to accept its responsibility. Mr. Speaker, this government has never shirked that responsibility. And this government, Mr. Speaker, when considering all the facts, dealing with all the alternatives, and dealing with a program which is intended to save the credit union movement, is asked to act, then in fact there are cases, Mr. Speaker, when the responsibility of government is such that you shall have to act.
Mr. Speaker, the required repayment of the preferred shares to this government will force Capital City Savings and Credit Union to set an unrealistic spread between what it pays and what it charges for money. Why has the minister forced the credit unions into a compromising and uncompetitive position, unlike the Northwest Trust?
Mr. Speaker, let me make it again very clear. Now, when it comes to the Northwest Trust arrangement, which the member talks about, and I know that I've attempted on at least 30 or so occasions to explain this, both to the socialists who have lack the fundamental understanding of business policies, that in fact the Northwest Trust arrangement, Mr. Speaker, was an arrangement which did the following thing. First of all, the real estate assets and the lack of profitability of Northwest Trust allowed us to negotiate a very favorable arrangement with the Canadian Deposit Insurance Corporation, wherein over $277 million worth of federal money was transferred to the province. And that money, Mr. Speaker, was at the heart of the assistance program for Northwest Trust. From that, Mr. Speaker, the province received the following. We received the control of this trust company, which is important to stabilize the financial institutions of this province at a time when traditional financial institutions are not aggressively pursuing loans. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, rehabilitated that trust company to ensure its profitability, and that annual report, Mr. Speaker, has been tabled showing first quarter profits over $500,000. Moreover, Mr. Speaker, we, the province, the people of Alberta, ended up with over $300 million worth of real estate assets, with which we have exactly nothing invested. Mr. Speaker, it seems to me that's a good deal, and that's a deal which bets on the future of this province, and one that I'm pleased to support. Now, with respect to...
Thank you, it's a good deal to have the final supplementary.
Will the minister confirm that most of the free $275 million that CDIC funds went to pay back the Treasury branches for its bad loans in Northwest Trust, while with the new credit union we'll have to pay back the government for its takeover?
Again, Mr. Speaker, in all fairness, I should have a very long period of time to put aside the misleading statements for the member from coarse language across the way. But let me now just deal with the question of the preferred shares. The preferred shares in the credit union, Mr. Speaker, is a unique way to provide for the redemption of the preferred shares in the credit union itself, Mr. Speaker. What we have done in combination through the Credit Union Stabilization Corp and the Central Federation of Credit Unions themselves is to buy a so-called zero-coupon bond worth approximately $30 million. Now, I know that's too complex for the member to understand, Mr. Speaker. But what will happen in 25 years, Mr. Speaker, there's going to be approximately $300 million there that will have to be paid back on a balloon basis. So you see, Mr. Speaker, the preferred shares and the debentures are used to finance the deficit position, some $300 million of deficits in the credit unions. And at the end of the period, Mr. Speaker, it'll be a wash transaction. You'll have $300 million in this zero-coupon bond. You'll have $300 million worth of liabilities of credit unions. They wash. What happens is you've rehabilitated, restructured, and eliminated the debt from the credit unions. Mr. Speaker, that's a grand financial plan in my mind, and one which assists the credit union movement, and we fully backstop that idea.
Unfortunately, the time for question period has expired. May we have unanimous consent to continue with this series of questions? Opposed? Edmonton Chair heard a negative. The Chair indeed heard a negative. The Chair also recognizes point of order, Edmonton Kingsway, followed by Edmonton Highlands.
I just wonder if the Honourable Treasurer would like to retract his statement that I was misleading the House with my question.
You're going to ask me to retract for calling the member for coarse language. With respect to misleading, misleading is not non-parliamentary, Mr. Speaker.
Sir, thank you. Therefore, no withdrawal. Member Edmonton Highlands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Referring to Standing Orders 22 and Beauchene Citation 233, both of which have to do with points of order, and referring also to an all-party agreement enunciated by the Speaker on the first day of the Assembly last summer, I'd like to point out that in the middle of question period today, the Minister for Hospitals and Medical Care attempted, through an unsolicited fashion, to interject his own interpretation of the facts subsequent to a ministerial response to a question which was not invited. Moreover, Mr. Speaker, the all-party agreement as enunciated by you in the Assembly last year called for an agreement that, A, points of order will not be raised during question period no matter how pressing they are, and B, ministers have the right to make supplementary information available at the end of question period, and then the fair thing would be that the member who originally put the question to the minister may ask a final supplementary question in response to the supplementary information. In light of all that, I believe that the Hospitals and Medical Care Minister should A, stop trying to bully his way through question period, and B, offer an apology to this Assembly for having broken the agreement which was all-party agreed to by all party House leaders and by the Speaker.
That's right.
Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, on the point of order, the original question today from the honourable member from Edmonton Centre was directed toward myself, and then a supplementary in the middle of that line of questioning was directed toward the Minister of Community Occupational Health. And during the course of the preamble to that supplementary, the honourable member made reference to matters which had been directed to me in the original question. And the reference that the honourable member made with respect to the report entitled "In Trouble, a Way Out" was, in my view, very misleading to the Assembly. And I thought, Mr. Speaker, that if that information had been provided when the original question is asked, I would have responded at that time. Mr. Speaker, there is absolutely nothing that I'm aware of in the rules of this House that prevent a minister from responding to a question in a supplementary way during the question period when it relates to his or her portfolio. That has been the practice for all the time that I've been in the Legislative Assembly, and nothing changes that. I have no intention, Mr. Speaker, of apologizing to the honourable member in any way, shape, or form.
All right, thank you.
Speaker.
Honourable member, on this point, one only gets to generally speak once on a point of order, and the Chair understood that the member for Edmonton Centre wanted to speak to this point of order. Is that correct? Not correct. All right. Edmonton Highlands, thank you.
Yes, well, on the point of order, Mr. Speaker, ordinarily the practice is where one minister believes it would be appropriate for another minister to supplement the information from the first minister, that indication is given to the House. In the second place, though, and I think more importantly, despite the comments from the member for Lethbridge East, the fact is that the minister was not responding to a question, but rather to an item that he believes is he believes his interpretation of the facts is correct. In that case, the member originally putting the question, according to the theory of fairness, which I think we all agreed to, would have the right to make a responsive question to the minister. In that instance, I believe it's appropriate that the minister make that additional information available at the end of question period, which is the procedure to which we all agreed.
Right.
On this particular point of order, indeed, observers of the House and what did occur was that the chair did indeed try to bring the minister to order after the minister had at least been allowed to get into what he was giving as supplementary information, and then was indeed requested and had to sit down and did not finish indeed the line of information that he was supplying to the House. But indeed, it's been a concern for the chair that, and from time to time when honourable ministers of the Crown look towards the chair to see whether they're going to get a chance to jump in and give extra supplementary information, more often than not, they're seeing the chair do this. Because really, it's a matter for additional supplementaries to be able to get in and to glean the information if needs be. But again, part of it is somewhat along the line of length of supplementaries, length of answers, and the amount of dialogue or interchange or baiting or whatever you want to call it that's going on in the House, and therefore time moves on in terms of question period, and frustration increases in all parts of the House. So I think in this respect that the conversation has been very useful, and the Chair trusts that all parts of the House will take it into consideration, but in actual fairness, the Chair does believe that, as in this case, supplementary information at the end of question period, which would then allow the member who originally raised the question to respond, and then for the final word to be given by the appropriate Minister of the Crown. Additional points of order? The Chair first would like to recognize a very significant event in the life of at least one member of the Assembly. I'm sure all members of the House who join in extending congratulations on his 56th birthday to the Government House Leader. You want a speech? We can't set that precedent.